It is said by some Muslim authorities that during the first caliphate of Abu Bakr, immediately after Muhammad's death, concern arose that his orally transmitted words might be forgotten. So many Muslim soldiers had been killed in battle that the number who had the Quran safely lodged in their memories had become alarmingly small. It was therefore decided to assemble every living witness, together with pieces of paper, stones, palm leaves, shoulder blades, ribs and bits of leather, on which sayings had been scribbled, and give them to Zayd ibn Thabit, one of the Prophet's former secretaries, for an authoritative collation. Once this had been done, the believers had something like an authorized version. If true, this would date the Quran to a time fairly close to Muhammad's own life, but we swiftly discover that there is no certainty or agreement about the truth of the story. Some say that it was Ali, the fourth and not the first caliph, and the founder of Shi'ism, who had the idea. Many others, the Sunni majority, assert that it was Caliph Uthman, who reigned from 644 to 656, who made the finalized decision. Told by one of his generals that soldiers from different provinces were fighting over discrepant accounts of the Quran, Uthman ordered Zayd ibn Thabit to bring together the various texts, unify them, and have them transcribed into one. When this task was complete, Uthman ordered standard copies to be sent to Kufa, Basra, Damascus, and elsewhere, with a master copy retained in Medina. Uthman thus played the canonical role that had been taken in the standardization and purging and censorship of the Christian Bible by Irenaeus and by Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria. The roll was called, and some texts were declared sacred and inerrant, while others became apocryphal. Outdoing Athanasius, Uthman ordered that all earlier and rival editions be destroyed. Even supposing this version of events to be correct, which would mean that no chance existed for scholars ever to determine or even dispute what really happened in Muhammad's time, Uthman's attempt to abolish disagreement was a vain one. The written Arabic language has two features that make it difficult for an outsider to learn. It uses dots to distinguish consonants like B and T, and in its original form it had no sign or symbol for short vowels, which could be rendered by various dashes or comma-type marks. Vastly different readings, even of Uthman's version, were enabled by these variations. Arabic script itself was not standardized until the later part of the 9th century, and in the meantime the undotted and oddly voweled Quran was generating wildly different explanations of itself, as it still does. This might not matter in the case of the Iliad, but remember that we are supposed to be talking about the unalterable and final word of God. There is obviously a connection between the sheer feebleness of this claim and the absolutely fanatical certainty with which it is advanced. To take one instance that can hardly be called negligible, the Arabic words written on the outside of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem are different from any version that appears in the Quran. The situation is even more shaky and deplorable when we come to the Hadith, or that vast orally generated secondary literature which supposedly conveys the sayings and actions of Muhammad, the tale of the Quran's compilation, and the sayings of the companions of the Prophet. Each Hadith, in order to be considered authentic, must be supported in turn by an isnad, or chain, of supposedly reliable witnesses. Many Muslims allow their attitude to everyday life to be determined by these anecdotes. Regarding dogs as unclean, for example, on the sole ground that Muhammad is said to have done so. My own favourite tale goes the other way. The Prophet is said to have cut off the long sleeve of his garment, rather than disturb a cat that was slumbering on it. Cats in Muslim lands have been generally spared the awful treatment visited on them by Christians, who've often regarded them as satanic familiars of witches. As one might expect, the 6 authorized collections of hadith, which pile hearsay upon hearsay through the unwinding of the long spool of isnads, A told B, who had it from C, who learned it from D, were put together centuries after the events they purport to describe. One of the most famous of the 6 compilers, Bukhari, died 238 years after the death of Muhammad. Bukhari is deemed unusually reliable and honest by Muslims, and seems to have deserved his reputation, in that of the 300,000 attestations he accumulated in a lifetime devoted to the project, he ruled that 200,000 of them were entirely valueless and unsupported. Further exclusion of dubious traditions and questionable isnads reduced his grand total to 10,000 hadith. You are free to believe, if you so choose, that out of this formless mass of illiterate and half-remembered witnessing, the pious Bukhari, more than 2 centuries later, managed to select only the pure and undefiled ones that would bear examination. Some of these candidates for authenticity might have been easier to sift out than others. The Hungarian scholar Ignaz Goldziher, to quote a recent study by Reza Arslan, was among the first to show that many of the hadith were no more than verses from the Torah and the Gospels, bits of rabbinic sayings, ancient Persian maxims, passages of Greek philosophy, Indian proverbs, and even an almost word-for-word reproduction of the Lord's Prayer. Great chunks of more or less straight biblical quotation can be found in the hadith, including the parable of the workers hired at the last moment and the injunction, "Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth," the last example meaning that this piece of pointless pseudo-profundity has a place in two sets of revealed scripture. Aslan notes that by the time of the 9th century, when Muslim legal scholars were attempting to formulate and codify Islamic law through the process known as ijtihad, they were obliged to separate many hadith into the following categories: lies told for material gain and lies told for ideological advantage. Quite rightly, Islam effectively disowns the idea that it is a new faith, let alone a cancellation of the earlier ones, and it uses the prophecies of the Old Testament and the Gospels of the New like a perpetual crutch or fund to be leaned on or drawn upon. In return for this derivative modesty, all it asks is to be accepted as the absolute and final revelation. As might be expected, it contains many internal contradictions. It is often cited as saying that there is no compulsion in religion, and as making reassuring noises about those of other faiths being peoples of the book, or followers of an earlier revelation. The idea of being tolerated by a Muslim is as repulsive to me as the other condescensions, whereby Catholic and Protestant Christians agreed to tolerate one another, or extend toleration to Jews. The Christian world was so awful in this respect and for so long, that many Jews preferred to live under Ottoman rule and submit to special taxes and other such distinctions. However, the actual Quranic reference to Islam's benign tolerance is qualified because some of these same peoples and followers may be such of them as are bent on evil-doing, and it takes only a short acquaintance with the Quran and the Hadith to discover other imperatives, such as the following. Nobody who dies and finds good from Allah in the hereafter would wish to come back to this world even if he were given the whole world and whatever is in it, except the martyr who, on seeing the superiority of martyrdom, would like to come back to the world and be killed again. Or, God will not forgive those who serve other gods beside him, but he will forgive whom he will for other sins. He that serves other gods besides God is guilty of a heinous sin. I chose the first of these two violent excerpts from a whole thesaurus of unsavoury possible ones, because it so perfectly negates what Socrates is reported to have said in Plato's Apology, to which I am coming. And I chose the second because it is such a patent and abject borrowing from the Ten Commandments. The likelihood that any of this humanly derived rhetoric is inerrant, let alone final, is conclusively disproved, not just by its innumerable contradictions and incoherencies, but by the famous episode of the Quran's alleged satanic verses, out of which Salman Rushdie was later to make a literary project. On this much-discussed occasion, Muhammad was seeking to conciliate some leading Meccan polytheists, and in due course experienced a revelation that allowed them, after all, to continue worshipping some of the older local deities. It struck him later that this could not be right, and that he must have inadvertently been channeled by the devil, who for some reason had briefly chosen to relax his habit of combating monotheists on their own ground. Muhammad believed devoutly not just in the devil himself, but in minor desert devils or jinns as well. It was noticed even by some of his wives that the Prophet was capable of having a revelation that happened to suit his short-term needs, and he was sometimes teased about it. We are further told, on no authority that need be believed, that when he experienced revelation in public, he would sometimes be gripped by pain and experience loud ringing in his ears. Beads of sweat would burst out on him even on the chilliest of days. Some heartless Christian critics have suggested that he was an epileptic, though they fail to notice the same symptoms in the seizure experienced by Paul on the road to Damascus. But there is no need for us to speculate in this way. It is enough to rephrase David Hume's unavoidable question. Which is more likely? That a man should be used as a transmitter by God to deliver some already existing revelations, or that he should utter some already existing revelations and believe himself to be, or claim to be, ordered by God to do so. As for the pains and the noises in the head or the sweat, one can only regret the seeming fact that direct communication with God is not an experience of calm, beauty, and lucidity. The physical existence of Muhammad, however poorly attested by the Hadith, is a source of both strength and weakness for Islam. It appears to put it squarely in the world and provides us with plausible physical descriptions of the man himself, but it also makes the whole story earthy, material, and gross. We may flinch a little at this mammal's betrothal to a 9-year-old girl, and at the keen interest he took in the pleasures of the dining table, and the division of the spoils after his many battles and numerous massacres. Above all, and here is a trap that Christianity has mostly avoided, by awarding its prophet a human body but a non-human nature, he was blessed with numerous descendants and thus placed his religious posterity in a position where it was hostage to his physical one. Nothing is more human and fallible than the dynastic or hereditary principle, and Islam has been racked from its birth by squabbles between princelings and pretenders, all claiming the relevant drop of original blood. If the total of those claiming descent from the founder was added up, it would probably exceed the number of holy nails and splinters that went to make up the 1,000-foot cross on which, judging by the number of splinter-shaped relics, Jesus was evidently martyred. As with the lineage of the Isnads, a direct kinship line with the Prophet can be established if one happens to know and be able to pay the right local imam. In the same way, Muslims still make a certain obeisance to those same satanic verses, and tread the pagan polytheistic path that was laid out long before their Prophet was born. Every year at the Hajj, or annual pilgrimage, one can see them circling the cuboid Kaaba shrine in the centre of Mecca, taking care to do so 7 times, following the direction of the sun around the earth, as Karen Armstrong weirdly and no doubt multiculturally puts it, before kissing the black stone set in the Kaaba's wall. This probable meteorite, which no doubt impressed the yokels when it first fell to earth, the gods must be crazy, no, make that God must be crazy, is a stop on the way to other ancient pre-Islamic propitiations, during which pebbles must be hurled defiantly at a rock that represents the evil one. Animal sacrifices complete the picture. Like many but not all of Islam's principal sites, Mecca is closed to unbelievers, which somewhat contradicts its claim to universality. It is often said that Islam differs from other monotheisms in not having had a reformation. This is both correct and incorrect. There are versions of Islam, most notably the Sufi, much detested by the devout, which are principally spiritual rather than literal, and which have taken on some accretions from other faiths. And since Islam has avoided the mistake of having an absolute papacy, capable of uttering binding edicts, hence the proliferation of conflicting fatwas from conflicting authorities, its adherents cannot be told to cease believing what they once held as dogma. This might be to the good, but the fact remains that Islam's core claim, to be unimprovable and final, is at once absurd and unalterable. Its many warring and discrepant sects, from Ismaili to Ahmadi, all agree on this indissoluble claim. Reformation has meant, for Jews and Christians, a minimal willingness to reconsider Holy Writ as if it were, as Salman Rushdie so daringly proposed in his turn, something that can be subjected to literary and textual scrutiny. The number of possible Bibles is now admitted to be immense, and we know, for example, that the portentous Christian term Jehovah is a mistranslation of the unuttered spaces between the letters of the Hebrew Yahweh. Yet no comparable project has ever been undertaken in Quranic scholarship. No serious attempt has been made to catalogue the discrepancies between its various editions and manuscripts, and even the most tentative efforts to do so have been met with almost inquisitional rage. A critical case in point is the work of Christoph Luxemburg, the Syriac-Aramaic version of the Quran, published in Berlin in the year 2000. Luxemburg coolly proposes that far from being a monoglot screed, the Quran is far better understood once it is conceded that many of its words are Syriac-Aramaic rather than Arabic. His most celebrated example concerns the rewards of a martyr in paradise. When retranslated and redacted, the heavenly offering consists of sweet white raisins rather than virgins. This is the same language and the same region from which much of Judaism and Christianity emerged. There can be no doubt that unfettered research would result in the dispelling of much obscurantism. But at the very point when Islam ought to be joining its predecessors in subjecting itself to rereadings, there is a soft consensus among almost all the religious that because of the supposed duty of respect that we owe the faithful, this is the very time to allow Islam to assert its claims at their own face value. Once again, faith is helping to choke free inquiry and the emancipating consequences that it might bring.